Colby Olson, the host of the Just Fantasy Baseball Show and consistent contributor on Not Gambling Advice. Colby came in with so many great football bets, and now he's transitioning to help us win our leagues on the pitching side. Of course, we have Aram here. Aram and I are going to pick your brain about pitching. You said before we press the record button that pitching is your favorite thing to talk about. Is that correct?
It without a doubt is my favorite thing to talk about because I don't know. The hitters are a little harder to predict. I think you can predict what pitchers are going to do a little bit more accurately than hitters. There's a lot more that goes into it on the hitting side, which I'm sure Aram could speak to a bit more than I could.
Well, and I think even on the hitting side, and we've had Colby and I've had, gosh, millions of conversations about this since we were sophomores in college, and for I was a sophomore, he was a freshman when we first met, but like there's a lot of data and hitting and a lot of things that are involved there. But I think the way that you can really put together an arsenal and you can really craft one, through the data, through the information, through everything that you get, knowing Colby and the way he is with numbers, it's no surprise to me that he loves pitching the way he does. And I'm excited about this because I think this is a really good way to cross over and showcase. I know you guys, we did it with Clay already, but what we've got going on the Just Fantasy Baseball side. And I love the matchup of Clay and Colby because Clay, I think, is more into the hitting side and really likes to dive into the position players and dive into all of that. And not that either of you don't like going on the other side, but it seems like a perfect mashup here. So I'm excited to talk pitching too, because I've been very hitter heavy lately. And I got to start doing some of my research for pitchers because we might be in the same fantasy league, but I know Colby's going to have to give away all of his favorite tidbits. So I'll remember, and I'm going to leverage all of this information, Colby.
And Colby,
Yeah, absolutely, man.
you're a fantasy baseball player, you're a gambler, but I think probably, and you've said this yourself, that you love predicting pitching performance. I feel like that's at your core, and you use that to help you gamble, and you use that to help you in fantasy baseball. And as a numbers guy, as our head of analytics over here at Just Baseball, what are some of your favorite stats to predict pitchers' performance like next year? Like you see maybe this pitcher struggled in the ERA department, but you see something that you think he's going to thrive next year, or the opposite. I'm curious just to pick your brain on the number side.
Yeah, absolutely, Pete. I mean, I think it's, at this point, it can be pretty simple, right? The best pitchers in the league are going to be the ones that strike out the most batters. They limit walks. They allow a lot of soft contact. It would be preferable if that soft contact is on the ground, but there are plenty of fly ball pitchers that succeed at the major league level, and some of the best pitchers in the game are fly ball pitchers. But yeah, if you limit hard contact and you strike guys out and you don't give up free passes, you're going to have a pretty good chance of performing at a high level. Obviously, it can go deeper within there. Like you can look into, a guy's whiff rate on his specific slider, on his specific curveball, or how is he getting, whiffs on his fastball. But at the end of the day, all those things are going to add up to equal his strikeout rate, his total strikeout rate. Like you can see a lot from just a few stats. It's really not that complicated.
And how do you use that to be better at fantasy baseball? Like go through kind of the scoring and some indicators through the numbers that you look at that I'm saying, oh, this is the guy who I want to pick up in drafts.
Yeah, absolutely. So a traditional 5x5 fantasy baseball league, you'd have 5 pitching categories that you're competing for every single week, being ERA, total strikeouts, wins, and whip. So walks plus hits per innings pitched. So if you don't give up free passes, you have a pretty good chance of being pretty good. And it also goes along with the soft contact thing. Don't give up hits, right? Be as good of a pitcher as you can be. But yeah, obviously some leagues have they play by different rules and they add on stats. But traditionally, those are kind of the 5. Quality starts maybe.
I dabble, like I play fantasy. I'm really, I think the league that I spend the most like time in is the Dynasty Fantasy League, and then I barely keep up with it well enough during the season, and then I'm super active with prospect drafts, trades, whatever, and then I got to work on that. But just knowing what I'm deficient in some areas, like the win situation is always so fascinating to me because now you're looking at like the team, right? Like I'm looking at Kyle Wright as the wins leader last year. And then you have 2 Houston Astros in Justin Verlander and Framber Valdez, and then you have Julio Urias. So it's all like really good teams, right? All playoff teams. Even you, Darvish, checking in with the Padres at number 5. Like it's always going to be that playoff team. So how much do you bake in the win side of it? Because there's some like pitchers that Kyle Wright doesn't belong in the conversation. I love Kyle Wright. I think he's a really solid pitcher. Doesn't belong in the conversation with Justin Verlander, Framber Valdez, Julio Urias, but he is going to win a lot of games. How do you balance like this guy's going to, rack up a lot of wins on a good team versus this pitcher is going to put up way better statistics in the other 4, major categories?
I don't really think you can let it get to you or be kind of a big decision maker for you because of how random wins are. I think the other piece of that too is that, most of the top pitchers in fantasy are on good teams for the most part, right? So it doesn't really affect, even Sandy, right? How many games did Sandy win last year? He still wins games
still won
because of how
14 games.
Yeah, exactly. He still
tied him
wins
for 12.
games because of how good he is. So it's not really like a big contributing factor for me when I'm deciding. Like I'm really focused on, strikeouts, ERA. Those are the big 2, I think, for me.
And we're going to get into specific pitchers that you really like, even though you haven't dropped the rankings yet, because we still are about a month out of most major drafts. Of course, we're recording today on February 15th, and the regular season doesn't start until March 30th. So we have some time. So make sure to subscribe and listen to the Just Fantasy Baseball show, where Colby and Clay will be breaking down these pitchers, as well as you can find all the written rankings on justbaseball.com. But we're going to pick his brain on a couple of pitchers. But before we get into that, I am curious about how you gauge injuries, right? It's the hardest thing to predict in fantasy baseball. A guy like Jacob deGrom, when healthy, is the best pitcher in baseball. But is he healthy? How do you do that going into drafts, like with a guy like Jacob deGrom? Because I assume Sandy might be the first pitcher off the board because he's going to give you 230 innings. He's going to give you plenty of strikeouts, and he's going to get the wins. Or is it someone else? You tell me.
Yeah, I mean, I think the 2 hardest things to predict are injuries and also predicting like a guy like, say, Spencer Strider. Like how many innings is he going to throw this year? Is he going to make the leap to throwing 180, 190 innings when we saw him throw like 150 last year, right? It's thinking about those types of things, even like rookies, like how many innings can I actually rely on like George Kirby to throw this year? When it comes to, I think there's a difference in predicting Jacob deGrom from an injury standpoint and predicting other guys from an injury standpoint, like say like a Luis Castillo or like an Aaron Nola. Like Jacob deGrom is kind of in his own world of injury, where he has just kind of had serial injury for the last few years. And it's not just one, part of his body. He's had elbow injuries. He's had shoulder injuries. He's had lat injuries. He's beat up all over his body. And yeah, I would say Jacob deGrom for me is a big stay away because he's coming as a top 30 pick. And you did mention, Pete, that Sandy's going to be the first off the board. He's actually not. Corbin Burns and Garrett Cole are going ahead of him right now. Sandy's going actually about the same ADP. You'll hear me use that a lot. So if any listener doesn't know what ADP is, it's average draft position. So yeah, Sandy and deGrom are going about the same.
So to build off of like Peter's point, I would personally, love the safety that comes with a Sandy Alcantara, especially just the fact that he is what he is in terms of durability, but then also pitching in Marlins Park where he just dominates. Anytime he had a tough spell, like got knocked around by the Dodgers on the road, he'd go to Miami, reset, and go 7 shutout or 7-1 run, inning. So he might not have you run 1,000 simulations. He might not have as many seasons as the caliber of Corbin Burns or Garrett Cole in terms of the strikeouts in the other categories. But I guess Cole racks up a lot of innings. Corbin does still too, but just for the sake of the question, because I think this could be applied to a lot of different kinds of pitchers. And, when you're comparing between a couple of different guys, how much does it matter? And this is kind of a Cy Young conversation we always have too. How much in fantasy does it matter to have more innings versus higher strikeout rate? Because, I know Garrett Cole compiles innings, but just for the sake of the question, like Cole's going to strike out way more guys, or at least a decent amount more guys. But Sandy is probably going to pace, like Peter said, Major League Baseball in innings by a pretty good margin if it's up to him. So how do you balance that with fantasy? Like, how much value is there to throwing an extra 40 or 50 innings than the average guy? Or would you rather have a higher K percentage if the ERAs might not be too far off?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all a math equation. You're absolutely right. And I think Garrett Cole is rightly ranked ahead of Sandy. Garrett Cole threw 200 innings last year. He's thrown up to 212 in his career before. And you look at Sandy last year, 228 innings, which is unicorn status there. But
Garrett Cole
you know,
allowed like 70 home runs last year.
It was quite a unicorn season for Garrett Cole last year, for sure. You know, he's always had a knack for giving up home runs, and that's been the problem, but he could very well lead the league in strikeouts every single year. And that's kind of the, you know, the draw for Garrett Cole. But yeah, I think Aram, it really just comes down to being a math equation. How much do you value those extra 20 innings, and do you expect Sandy to have a better ERA at the end of the year than Garrett Cole? I think that's the big question, right? Because Garrett Cole is probably going to pace him in strikeouts, but if you believe the ERA is going to be lower, I could see a reason for waiting for Sandy Alcantara, a round later.
Yeah, personally, I'm a Yankee fan. I'm taking Garrett Cole. I just am. Like that is possible is a horse. Not to say that Garrett Cole isn't, but the park factor. Garrett Cole plays in Yankee Stadium. It's a little tougher to pitch there. Also, the stadiums that he is going to pitch in the AL East, I know that the divisions, the schedule is going to be different, so that's gonna take a little bit off. But overall, Sandy is pitching in better pitchers' parks consistently. So I asked Clay this question because Colby, last year you and I were covering a lot of the fantasy stuff, and I remember this take still sits with me because it was so shitty, and it was that Jared Walsh should be over Jose Abreu in our first base rankings. If you remember that, I still remember that.
I fought you to the death on that, man. I fought you so hard to put Jose Abreu over Jared Walsh.
And I told Clay this, and it was like, I had so much faith after one season, then a guy like Jose Abreu, who has been there, done that. We're going to kind of go through 0 to 100, 100 to 200, kind of find value guys who are overrated. So my first question to you, Jared Walsh is a guy who was a top 10 first base. That's how we ranked him. He obviously didn't end up. I think he was like top 70. So who is a pitcher that you're hanging, probably. Who is a pitcher that you're hanging your hat on this year? Who is a pitcher that you're almost a little bit afraid that you're this high on him, that you're ranking him ahead of a lot of guys? Someone that you're willing to say, if he's wrong, I'll be there at the end of the season to say, I whiffed. Who's that guy for you?
Yeah, I think it makes sense to start with, looking at like the top 20 pitchers, and my guy right now is Shane McClanahan. He's a true ace, being taken, 11th off the board right now. And if you take out closers, Emmanuel Clase and Edwin Diaz, he's going as, starting pitcher 9 off the board. But I think he's warranted of just being just as valuable as like a Spencer Strider, or up there, potentially in the, Sandy Cole category. I think he's right below that just because of innings pitched, but he really is a true ace. He doesn't hurt you in any category. Last year, he ranked 8th in ERA. He was 3rd in WHIP. He had the 6th highest K rate in all of baseball, 6th in xERA, 10th in FIP. You just look at him overall, he doesn't hurt you anywhere. And then he racked on 12 wins last year. And I see no reason why he couldn't rack on more this year. I think he'll go close to 200 innings this year. He's a stud. And when I look at a guy that I'm actually kind of, lower than McClanahan on, and lower than a lot of where he's going, is Spencer Strider. He's going ADP 35. And for reference, McClanahan is ADP 42 right now. My problem with Strider is not that I don't believe he'll get it done on the mound, because he put up freakish numbers last year, right? A 1.83 FIP at 130 innings is like superhuman. I just question if he will be able to throw 170, 180 innings. Like, is he going to be capped at 140, 150 innings? And that's the big question when you're dropping he might be a 2nd or a 3rd round pick for you. It's tough.
So McClanahan might be kind of limited in his own respect too, though, right? Like, how worried are you about with the shoulder issue, obviously coming back last year makes it a lot better. If he ended the season on the IL, with the shoulder issue, that'd be concerning, but he got the injection, came back, and was able to throw at the end of the year and into the postseason. Still racked up 166 in the third innings. But with the way that the Rays manage things, and that's the other interesting wrinkle of this all, right, is you got to look at how teams kind of trot out their starters in today's game. And ultimately, you still had the opportunity, 28 starts, 166 in the third innings, pretty much par for the course in today's game. If anything, that's a pretty decent workload. But how much does that kind of factor in for you? And how much do you think that maybe the shoulder issue at the end of the year is what's scaring people away from McClanahan going into 2023?
Yeah, I'm not too worried about it. The shoulder, I'm not too worried about because it's just so hard to predict injuries. He came back at the end of the year, pitched really strong. In terms to answer your question about the Rays and how they manage players, I think that the Rays do a great job of managing the players that need it. And McClanahan is not one of those guys. Last year, they let him go 7-8 strong, even, finish complete games at times. He's their workhorse. He's their workhorse because he needs to be, but also because he's so damn good that why would they ever take him out of the game? 166 innings last year. I would expect him to jump over 180 this year.
What about his teammate, Tyler Glasnow, a guy we saw in the playoffs last year dominate? And when he's on the mound, like I've talked about this before too, and Colby would probably mention it to you. When he's on the mound, I don't know how anybody hits him. Because of the extension, because of the 100 miles an hour, because of the ball, 6'7". But he is a guy who has been privy to injuries, and it seems like it's almost consistent at this point. How do you view him? And it's such a difficult question because we know when he's one of the best pitchers in baseball. He's almost kind of like Buxton in that way. Freak talent. When he's on the field, he does amazing things. But it's about staying on the field. And you said it yourself, it's so hard to gauge injuries, but we saw him look healthy at the end of the year. What's your view on Tyler Glasnow this year?
It's it's a tough question because Tyler Glasnow is being taken very high. He's being taken right around where Framber Valdez is being taken, right around where Tristan McKenzie is being taken, right? Those are two certified studs, and Glasnow deserves all of the respect as well. But yeah, when you haven't pitched in 2 years, there's definitely the chance for Glasnow to come back and have flare-ups. I'm not saying he's going to get like full-blown hurt and be out for the year, but there's a big chance for him to have a flare-up here and there. But the upside is there. I'm not going to tell you not to take Tyler Glasnow because the upside is there. He's going ADP 85 right now. So it just depends. I think I would rather have Framber Valdez because I know what I'm getting there, and I'm getting an innings eater a la Sandy Alcantara. And Tristan McKenzie's a high upside guy that really finished the season strong. So it's two other guys that are just proving themselves as aces. And Tyler Glasnow is an ace, but it's the question.
Tough.
So I think honestly for me, and again, maybe when you break it down fantasy wise, it's a little bit closer. I think it's a no-brainer to go Valdez and McKenzie with again, what you've showed on the side of the Framber, just innings eater, gets so many ground balls and mixes in enough strikeouts though for a ground ball guy. McKenzie has some injury history, but no more than, a lot of really young talented pitchers in today's game. And, you talk about the big stride he made last year. To take it almost a step below that, because I think it's almost even more of a juggle here. Going back to Kyle Wright, I'm looking at some of the ADP like area and some of the rankings and the numbers there. And like Kyle Wright's kind of close to Glasnow. Wright is a guy that, he's not going to win you your league, but he's never going to lose you your league, right? If you take Kyle Wright, he's going to be solid for you and probably be a nice complimentary piece. You better hit on your other picks, but that's one where like, if you don't love anybody else in that range, Kyle Wright's not going to hurt you. And he's definitely going to be a solid contributor to your fantasy team. But for somebody like that, where the ceiling and the floor is so close versus a Tyler Glasnow, like what's the tipping point for you where you're like, okay, I can't pass on Glasnow here. That's why I bring up Kyle Wright, like George Kirby, Logan Gilbert, all of those guys. Like, where is the line that you draw on Tyler Glasnow, where you're like, I got to take Glasnow over this guy.
Yeah, I think it's Framber, McKenzie, and then right after McKenzie, you got to get Glasnow before it gets to like Robbie Ray, George Kirby, Hunter Green, because these are guys with question marks too, right? George Kirby is one of my favorite picks, but you really got to believe in George Kirby, right? He's going ADP 105. You know, you can probably get him a little lower than that in some leagues, maybe a little higher than in others. But he finished the season so strong last year. In his last 13 starts after the All-Star break, he had a 1.88 FIP. This is a guy that walked less than 2 per 9 over that span, struck out nearly 10 per 9. He's a fantastic pitcher. The question mark for Kirby, though, is, you know, a guy that threw 130 innings last year, is he going to take the step to 160, 170? And I don't know. I genuinely don't know.
So there's this cluster of starting pitchers that I just find fascinating. It's like Tony Gonsolin, Lance Lynn, Jesus Luzardo, Freddie Peralta, Lucas Giolito, Dustin May, Joe Ryan, Pablo Lopez. Like a lot of guys with question marks, high upside. I'm curious because this is the part of the draft where I feel like you can win your league. Right? It's to find that not diamond in the rough, but to take a chance on a guy. Maybe a Dustin May who, if he stays healthy, could look like Jacob deGrom. A Nestor Cortez Jr. who showed the fastball was one of the top 10 pitches overall in baseball by run value, but he's never done it before, right? Besides that year. Who is a guy kind of in that range? Or do you tend to go the safer route? Like Lance Lynn is probably going to be Lance Lynn and give you a 4 ERA and a bunch of innings and a decent amount of strikeouts that'll win some games. How do you gauge that in your draft? Is it based kind of on your team that you already have? Maybe if you drafted a lot of safe guys, then you go for the home run? Or are you consistently going for the home run because you either want to win your league or finish last? Like, how do you gauge that middle ground of pitchers where there's a lot of upside, but there's also plenty of downside?
Yeah, I think it's got to be like 70-30 for me. It's like 70% I'm chasing upside. I've got to have those guys in my rotation that I know I'm going to get solid innings from, that I can kind of bank on their production. And I think Joe Ryan's a guy like that. But I did want to mention that, you know, Nestor to me is I would stay away this year. And I love Nestor. I love watching him pitch. He's a friend of the show, obviously, but he's dealing with a shoulder injury now. He threw a career high 160 innings last year, and now he's dealing with a shoulder problem before the season's even started. That's terrifying. And he's going very high in drafts, right? Pete, we were all over him last year. You gave him as one of your, 5 under the radar picks. And I think he was going like after 300. It was like 320 ADP, right? That was awesome. But now he's going in the top 150, and it's worrisome for him coming off of a career high workload and already dealing with the shoulder injury for me. But 2 guys that you didn't mention in that group, actually going after that group that I'm even kind of more all over. There's a lot of guys in that group that have question marks. One guy that I love as a safe pick is Brady Singer. Threw 150 innings last year, a 3.23 ERA, 3.58 FIP. Not flashy, but strikes out enough and doesn't walk guys, gets ground balls, 49% ground ball rate. He also doesn't play on a great team, but he still racked up 10 wins last year, right? I think the Royals, a lot of the games that they are going to win this year are going to be Brady Singer starts. And I think he's still kind of a guy that's flying under the radar, even though he had so much hype coming out of college. He's still kind of flying under the radar, and I think he can take a step forward this year and throw 170 plus innings and be a really good workhorse for you at a good value. A guy that, if you want to hit a home run, it's Kodai Senga. I mean, this guy could be unbelievable. He could produce ace level value for you. And he's going right next to Brady Singer at ADP 186. Like, you're getting to me, an absolute steal. And I think you're going to have to take Kodai Senga a lot earlier than ADP 186. I took him recently in a draft at 165. And then I actually got Brady Singer 2 rounds later. So Kodai Senga is a guy that I'm willing to take that chance on.
One note on Nestor. I believe it's more hamstring. I think he.
It's not shoulder. Okay.
But there is a concern, an understandable concern about the workload, because he's a guy that's never thrown a ton of innings. His delivery is like, it's unique and definitely puts some pressure on his arm. And I hope that's not an issue, but that's something that I know a lot of evaluators have kind of been concerned about, and a lot of people have been worried about is how does that shoulder and that arm hold up with those mechanics, with the way he's kind of built. But I know he talked about it on the podcast with us. He put a lot of time in the weight room, so hopefully that'll translate into more innings. But I agree. I mean, it's just in terms of precedence, there's not a lot of Nestor Cortez's, and for better and for worse, that's a testament to him. But that's also something that, if you don't want to roll the dice, I don't blame you on the fantasy side there, especially in that ballpark, right? A guy that likes to elevate the fastball. We talked about Garrett Cole being susceptible to the home run ball. If Nestor Cortez's fastball drops down a tick, it goes from one of the best pitches in baseball to something that, could end up being a home run machine. And that's crazy with the fine line with those kind of riding fastballs in a hitter's park there. Is it all right if I jump to relievers, Peter? Or do you have any more starter questions? Because I have some interesting reliever questions.
Yeah, give me some reliever questions. Then we
do
can go
whatever you
to,
want. Literally
okay.
do whatever you want. I'll ask starter. We're just talking pitching. We're talking ball. I like this.
Right.
We're talking ball.
I didn't want to send us rogue and then send us all back around. But what's interesting to me is I think the reliever situation, and this goes back to me playing fantasy as a kid. I feel like the more that's an area where it's just if you know what's going on with roster situations and with teams, you can find some diamonds in the rough on the closer side to pick up those, coveted saves. And I know you want to get guys to just strike guys out too, and that's always great. But who are some guys that you think could have some underrated amount of saves this year, if that makes sense, right? That you still have the traditional Edwin Diaz, Emmanuel Clase, Josh Hader type closers that, anytime you're within 3 runs and you're going into the 9th inning, those guys are going to take the ball. But you got a lot of teams that kind of go by committee now, or other teams that, don't really have their clear cut closer yet. So who are some guys that you're looking at that you think could pick up maybe some saves that maybe people aren't really putting in the closer category?
Sure. I think the biggest question mark coming into this season is, what is the Dodgers bullpen going to look like? You have Evan Phillips, you have Daniel Hudson back there potentially getting saves, possibly, some other guys, but I like Evan Phillips a lot, and he really pitched well last year. I think that's a guy to take a flyer on, because if he does lock down 15 saves in the Dodgers bullpen, that would be huge. But honestly, I think my best advice for drafting 4 saves is get, 2 to 3 guys that are going to get saves, and then draft a guy that might be in that 8th inning role right now, but has ridiculous stuff. Because you never know either who is going to get hurt, or you never know who's going to implode. You really don't, right? Chapman was the Yankees closer forever, but Clay Holmes really took that over last year.
I'm also curious too, because I've never understood this, and this is probably why I tend to finish 3rd and 4th and sometimes 8th, is I don't know when to draft closers, right? Because Aram spoke about Edwin Diaz and a couple other these elite closers, and they're ranked in the top 10 pitchers in fantasy baseball. Their ADPs are in the mid-30s. I've always found it incredibly difficult to rationalize taking an Edwin Diaz over a top 30 hitter when I need an outfielder, right? How do you view closers in the draft? Are you a guy who says there's real value here and an Edwin Diaz is maybe better than I don't know, just throwing names out there like a Kyle Tucker, even though I'm not sure exactly where they're ranked, but how do you gauge that when you're going into draft day? That's always been my biggest struggle, on top of trying to draft rookies and seeming smart, and then they play 80 games and hit a rookie wall, and I'm like, wow, it was smart at draft day, but it wasn't actually good for my fantasy league long term.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's the biggest struggle that a lot of fantasy owners have, and even myself, because of how league dependent it is too, right? Every league is different with, their scoring or how they view closers, or even how the other people in your draft are viewing closers, right? Pete, you're like, oh, I'm staying away. Maybe everybody else might be staying away too. I think my strategy is I would like to get one of the top guys, whether it be Diaz, whether it be Clase, potentially Hader as well. And then I can wait, and I have this breathing, I can take kind of deep breath and be like, okay, I've figured out my number one closer. I think the other thing too is that in a lot of drafts, I feel like if I grab that closer early and I know he's going to be a stud and get me 40 saves, I know I'm going to make up the margin on the back end with like my sleepers. Like I always do. I always nail those guys. Like that's the big thing for me.
But
it reminds me. Oh, so
hold on, Aram. Just one quick question, just to follow up on that. Like, this is just where I'm confused, right? Lindor is ADP 33. Edwin Diaz is ADP 34. Like, my brain says I take Francisco Lindor every single day of the week, but where do you separate, right? Where do you separate where I'm going to take Edwin Diaz over this tier of hitters, if that makes sense? Because that's my biggest struggle here. I always say, well, duh, I'm going to take Lindor.
I mean, like I said, Pete, it's very league by league dependent, right? If you look at Edwin Diaz, for example, has gone as high as 10 in some leagues and as low as 92 in others, right? Emmanuel Clase has gone as high as 13 and as low as 98 in others. It really depends on your scoring. Like, to give you an example, I did a best ball draft, which means like you just draft your team and you're stuck with that team for the entire year. And I drafted Emmanuel Clase 65th overall. So like, that's more palatable than drafting him 30th. Yeah, I'm with you on that. Like, I think I would rather have Lindor.
Okay.
But good. I think it is worth it to get these top guys. It really is.
To me, it reminds me of like the tight end position in fantasy football, where it's like, if you're not going to get the top guy, like I'll just wait. And most of the time I've realized the years that I do well in fantasy football is when I take the best tight end, because I feel like I can make it up with wide receiver depth or, potentially finding that handcuff running back that gets the opportunity or whatever it may be. And I think that's where it's like, I do feel like if I reach, I think it's a good point too. And to kind of build off of what Peter was saying, because I think it's an extremely difficult juggle. It's like, do I take, this third overall tight end or go get, maybe a wide receiver 1 or a wide receiver 2? It's really tough. But, I do think if you're really, really in the weeds, you can make up, that outfield spot or that infield spot that you maybe had to wait another round on because you took that closer. But it's pretty hard to make up the closer, because once you get the drop off from the first couple guys, it's pretty hard. But I feel like every year there's so many breakout offensive guys or breakout, outfield, infield, whatever it may be. Who is maybe your number one outside of Phillips, like super under the radar guy that could pick up saves that maybe nobody's paying attention to? Like, being that I just wrote way too many words on the AJ Puck JJ Bleday swap, like way too many. Like that's just a surface level example of like AJ Puck might end up saving more games than anybody else in that Marlins bullpen. I don't know how they're going to use him. I don't know how that's going to happen, but like, just for an example, who's somebody that you're looking at that you're like, oh, that guy might just fall right into the closer role in a bad bullpen, or just regardless might fall into the closer role? Because even bad teams, they win enough games in Major League Baseball to rack up at least a few saves, even the really bad ones.
A sneaky one, and it is a guy being talked about a decent amount because he's being taken, he's being taken 150 ADP. Some places lower than that in others. Alexis Diaz on Cincinnati Reds is one of the most electric bullpen arms that you might not know about yet. Struck out 12 per 9 last year. He struck out 15 per 9 in AA in 2021. Just a flamethrower. He had a 1.84 ERA last year with a 2.76 xERA. Picked up 10 saves even last year. And this year, most projection systems have him right between 20 and 23 saves. But yeah, I mean, he's lights out. And I feel like this Reds team is kind of sneaky enough to win 72 games. Like they could win 72. You might get 25 saves.
I have a question too about Shohei Ohtani, because Shohei Ohtani, when I look at ADP, right, I'm on Fantasy Pros, and I see Shohei Ohtani in terms of ESPN where he's getting drafted is number 1. And then on Yahoo, it's 52. On CBS, it's 9. On other places, it's between the 8 to 10 range. It seems to me that Shohei would easily be the number 1 pick. if you had to know, he pitches and hits. And another quick fact about Alexis Diaz before you answer the Shohei Ohtani question, by run value, Alexis Diaz's fastball was the same as Emmanuel Clase's cutter, which you may not expect. It was that good of a pitch by run value. But going back to Shohei Ohtani real quick, he has to be the number one pick, right? Or is he not? What? Why is he 52 on ESPN or Yahoo?
The reason I'm laughing,
52 ADP on Yahoo. I'm looking at Fantasy Pros right now.
That has to be because they're designating him as a hitter only. That's the only thing I could think of. But I'm just laughing because going from Alexis Diaz to Shohei Ohtani is one of the funniest transitions. But I think it all depends on the rules of your league. If Shohei Ohtani is eligible as both a pitcher and a hitter on your team, then he's the clear number one overall pick. Okay. If he's a pitcher, then I think you can stack him right in there with like DeGrom, Sandy. I think he's right there in terms of value. I might even take him above DeGrom, easily over DeGrom, maybe above Sandy. I mean, he's that good.
But what about as a hitter? Like, this is a guy that steals bags, not efficiently, but he still steals bags. I don't think stolen base percentage is a thing. We know he hits home runs. He's not, I think he got better and better in terms of like the on base and batting average department in the second half. And even if you're drafting Ohtani in just a league that only allows him to be a hitter or a pitcher, I still don't even totally get how that works. Like, why wouldn't you be able to use him as the guy that he is? Sure, he's far and away the best one, but you better hope you got pick number one. That's how it works. As a hitter that can produce home runs, drive in runs, and steal bases, why is he not higher up there? And
I mean, it shouldn't be ADP 50. I mean, I would rank him as a top 25 hitter.
And how much does it matter to have the power speed combination versus maybe like this is another tipping point, math equation conversation here. You could get a Kyle Schwarber who, hits 45 homers, or you could get, somebody else who, a Kyle Tucker who, let's say, hits 30 homers but swipes 15, 20 bags. Like, how do you balance that side of things? And like maybe what's more valuable?
Yeah, I mean, the key at the beginning of your draft is drafting guys that have it all, right? That's why Fernando Tatis is so valuable. That's why Ohtani is so valuable and why he would be deserving of a top 15 pick as just a hitter. But yeah, it's really important at the top of your draft to focus on grabbing guys that have both power and speed, which is why I don't find myself ending up with guys like Vlad Guerrero or even Juan Soto a lot of times. Like, I'm going for those, 5-tool guys, Julio Rodriguez, Kyle Tucker, Bo Bichette is a guy that I'm really targeting this year, and talked about it on, Clay and I ran through our top 10 shortstops, the episode released today. And so we were talking about Bo Bichette versus Bobby Witt Jr. and how much of a debate that is. But yeah, it's really important. It's why JT Realmuto is the number one catcher too, because of the speed factor.
2020.
So I know Clay came on yesterday and gave Will Smith his number one catcher, but debatable.
And that's why you guys got to go check out the Just Fantasy Baseball show. Colby, all these different topics, getting deep into the weeds, both hitting and pitching. But to steal a little bit of your guys' content, and don't give me everything, but I need a flyer, right? Dalton Varsho was a guy that you and I were both high on from the catching position who ended up being really good. That's kind of your McClanahan this year. But pitching wise, like my Nestor last year at 350, you had some great takes there too. Who is a guy deep in drafts that people need to pay attention in 20 in the ADP of 100 or lower?
Yeah. So a couple guys that I did want to touch on real quick that are between ADP 200 and 300, and then I'll give you my deep sleeper. I'm back on the Alex Cobb train again. You're going to have to rip me off that Alex Cobb train, and I'll get hurt again. 2.8 FIP last year with a 3.73 ERA in one of the friendliest home ballparks in baseball. And he's a ground ball pitcher with a 62% ground ball rate. I genuinely do not know how it was possible that he had a 3.73 ERA last year. The amount of times this guy burned me on bets last year is unbelievable. But still, he threw 150 innings last year. plays again in one of the friendliest home ballparks. I'll be all over him again this year. Another guy that I'll be all over is Trevor Rogers. I see no reason why Trevor Rogers shouldn't be at the top of your list. He came back, he was up and down with injuries last year, wasn't getting the same whiff numbers that he had in 2021. But this was a guy that I ranked as a top 20 starting pitcher coming into last year, and he really disappointed. But he finished the year really strong. His last 3 starts, 18 innings, 22 strikeouts, limited the walks, which was the big concern for him last year. It seemed like every start, it was like, 2, 3, 4 walks. And like when you're giving away that many free passes, it's just really, really hard to succeed. But I think, we're going to get a reminder of how good Trevor Rogers is this year. And then the last guy is Ranger Suarez, another guy that's a ground ball pitcher. He's, to me, a really high floor guy, gets a lot of soft contact, and the Phillies love him. So that's another guy to target like late in the 200s.
Yeah,
Aram perked up when I said Trevor Rogers.
Yeah, no, it's one thing I'll add on Trevor is, there's definitely some red flags last year, but the talent and what he's already done, and with Mel Stoudemire Jr. there, I felt like when I was watching Trevor last year, it was like he was trying to figure it out on the fly. Now he's had a whole offseason to figure it out. It's hard when you got 5 days between starts. You can't throw that much because you just threw, and you're trying to, iron out your mechanics and figure out what's going on. And he was trying to tweak it. It just didn't seem like he could quite find it. And then he got a little banged up. So I like that one. I'm always going to bet on Mel Stoudemire Jr. to, kind of help on the Marlins pitching side and continue to get the most out of those guys. And you look at the rotation, they've continued to do that. Most of those guys are overachievers from where they were once perceived to where they are now, except for maybe Jesus Luzardo, who's forever been, one of the top pitching prospects in baseball. But I guess my last question of this whole thing is,
well, I got to get my deep sleeper in.
Ooh, that was going to be my question, actually. So
you act like I don't have any more questions left too. Oh, don't worry. We're talking deep sleepers in a sec.
All right, deep sleeper, go.
Well, my deep sleeper last year, if you don't believe my track record, was Christian Javier.
I do remember.
The reason I loved Christian Javier so much is he had this swingman profile, but I thought for sure he was going to eventually get a chance in that Astros rotation, and that's exactly what he did. He proved to be an ace-level pitcher, but was kind of that swingman reliever starter. What is he? Is he just like a 3-inning guy? A guy that I see that could have that potential this year is Hayden Wesneski. And I know you guys love him. 2.18 ERA and 33 big league innings last year with a 2.18 xERA. He struck out 9 per 9. He walked 5% of batters, really low walk rate. I mean, this is a guy with the wipeout slider. And he threw 143 innings last year. Like, this isn't a guy that, wasn't built up. He's not like, he is built up. He can start 25 games, I think, this year. It just depends if the Cubs give him that chance. And I think that he's going to force his hand there.
Yankee fans, remember Hayden Wesneski traded for Scott Efros? Yeah. Oh,
yeah. Well,
he's Colby's ultimate sleeper, could turn into Christian Javier this year. We're all doing well.
I don't know about that. Like, I don't think he's at that level, but like, if he gets a chance to start, he's gonna really.
If he's 50% of Christian Javier, we lost the trade. Like, he's if Christian Javier proved last year, he threw a no-hitter in the freaking playoffs. Like, he was electric. And if Wesneski can put up a 3.5 ERA in 150 innings, and he's going that deep in drafts, he's a steal, and we expect him to do that, right, Aram?
100%, dude. So this was the one thing that I think is kind of deceiving. And I know you are what your numbers are at the end of the day, but Wesneski kind of struggled in his first 2 starts after the trade. Like, he got traded to a different AAA team, and then, had to kind of get acclimated and go right out there, and just didn't do great. And then you put together the final 3 AAA starts, and then his 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 big league appearances. He pitched to a 1.69 ERA in 48 innings. Opponents at 168. He punched out 48 and gave up only 28 hits. So, I mean, this guy really figured it out after that, like, kind of shaky outing or 2 after the trade, and really just kind of put everything together there. So I really think this guy's gonna blossom into a solid middle of the rotation starter. And you talk about kind of the way that guys are able to get ground balls. He gets ground balls and he gets whiff. That's always a nice profile.
Doesn't give up home runs.
Doesn't give up home runs. I'm excited to see what he does. On the Yankees side, sucks that Efros like immediately got hurt. I'm interested to see how Efros factors in once he does come back, because the Yankees have an unbelievable, just ability to build the bullpen out. But yeah, I think Wisniewski's going to be a dude. I'm excited to see what he does. And I can't believe how low he's going in drafts right now, because it's not like there's a lot of guys in his way in that Cubs rotation. They have added dudes, but I'm not worried about some of these guys, especially in the back end of that rotation, blocking Hayden Wisniewski with what he's been able to do after the last year.
Colby, you have one last
he's
thing
going
on?
right. He's going right next to your guy, Cal Quantrill, by the way. So
yeah, well, give me Cal. But so Aram, do you have one last question? Because I know I have one more. That was your last one. So the ultimate stay away. Like, who is the guy that's giving you nightmares? Who is the guy that I know, Colby, you're going to be 5 to 6 different leagues, maybe more, dynasty, points, head to head.
Not taking him in any of these leagues.
Yeah, you're just, I'm not taking this guy. He might be going high. He might be going low. Who is the ultimate stay away for you?
All right. Michael Kopech is my ultimate stay away. It's a guy that has been somewhat untrustworthy since his time with the Red Sox, and one reason that he was traded away from the Red Sox, but he's dealt with plenty of injuries. He had a really good start to last year, and a lot of people were like, oh, Michael Kopech is he finally coming out? He had a 3.36 ERA in 83 innings in the first half last year, and then he got hurt. Everything kind of fell apart in the second half, but I think it was a bit deceiving, right? He struck out just 21% of batters, walked 11% of batters, had a 4.5 FIP, a 3.94 expected ERA, but had a 3.54 ERA. I think it was a little bit deceiving, and he's still going somewhat high here. Let me check the exact ADP for you. He's going ADP 290, so it's somewhat late, but it's a guy for me that I just like. He's going to look, you're going to see Michael Kopech's name deep in your draft, and you're going to go, wow, I know that name. Don't draft him. Stay away.
Two guys in that range who I like better. Roansy Contreras with the Pirates, possibly even Justin Steele with the Cubs. Like guys who have plenty of upside. We even had Justin Steele on the podcast, friend of the program, who did really well for the Cubs as that lefty. And it's not like you can rely on past years with the White Sox where they're winning 95 games, because they might win 80 this year, which probably won't be that different from the Chicago Cubs. Maybe, here and there, but it's not like Kopech gets that annual, the White Sox have this loaded lineup. He gives up 3 runs, strikes out 7, and he wins the ballgame. That might just not happen anymore. So while Kopech is going late, who is a guy who's going pretty high, maybe in the top 30? And this is my final question, who you just don't have on any of your teams and you don't plan to. Not that you don't like him. I know you mentioned Strider, but who's another guy in that conversation where you like him, but he's not going to be on any of your teams?
Oh, it's tough because a lot of these guys are really, really damn good at the top. It's hard when you go down this list and it's like, oh, I guess I don't like Alek Manoah. Like, of course I do. But if I had to pick a guy that I'm sort of staying away from, I want to say a guy like Joe Musgrove might be a guy that I'm staying away from at his current price. Yeah, Joe Musgrove's going ADP 82. You can grab Zach Gallen near him. You can grab Framber Valdez even after him. I think I'm going for a guy like Framber over a Joe Musgrove, or I'd quite honestly rather pay up a round earlier on a Zach Gallen or a Max Fried, or a Christian Javier than Joe Musgrove.
I like that take.
I like it. I was actually going to specifically ask about Musgrove because I think he's kind of an interesting case of, he shows flashes of being that front line guy, but then you look at the numbers at the end and it's like, they're solid, but I would probably prefer Zach Gallen. And again, there's a little bit more maybe injury concern there, but Gallen is a clear cut ace. I think we saw that last year. Yeah, I like it. I like it. This is getting me excited to draft. This is getting me excited for fantasy football season. So I'm looking forward to seeing you guys continue to put these rankings out. And of course, those will all be published on justbaseball.com in the coming weeks. So keep up with that. Make sure you're subscribing to the Just Fantasy Baseball show, because these guys are going to get you right for your drafts, if you couldn't tell already from this episode.
And hopefully after listening to this episode, Arm's excited for fantasy baseball, not fantasy football, like you just said.
Did I say football?
You're in football mode. We just had the Super Bowl,
clearly
but now we're
that excited
transitioning
about fantasy baseball.
Hey, Aram, welcome to the Just Baseball show. All right.
No, but definitely baseball.
Go check out Colby's and Clay's podcast, the Just Fantasy Baseball Show. You can find it on YouTube. You can find it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen. Colby, plug anything else. Of course, your Twitter, before we say goodbye.
Yeah, no, just check us out. I really hope you guys take a listen. We're, our goal for Just Fantasy Baseball is we're going to be in and out. We're not going to give you any BS. It's just, here's the rankings. Here's who we like. Here's who we're staying away from. Most of the episodes are around 30 minutes. Like it's quick. It's in and out. So if you really want deep analysis, it's the place to come. One more guy I'm going to leave you with is, you'd be hard pressed to find me not interested in Noah Syndergaard this year. There's a piece of me that he's going deep in drafts. He's going, past ADP 300. The innings will be there. And if there's any guy that the Dodgers can turn around, it's got to be Syndergaard. If they can just get him a little more strikeouts, just turn that slider around, I can believe again.
It's a good take, because he's winning 25 games next year with a 280. All right, he's throwing 100 miles an hour, but even if he's half that, he'll be a good pitcher there for the Dodgers. Thanks again, Colby. This was awesome. Again, make sure to go check out the Just Fantasy Baseball show. It's linked in the episode description. And with that, thank you, everybody.